She was used to the silence. Not the quiet of a peaceful night, but the specific, heavy silence that falls over people who have been dismissed. Lieutenant Clara Brown stood at the edge of the tarmac at Da Nang Air Base, the hot Vietnam sun baking the concrete as the massive CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters thundered overhead, their rotor wash whipping her white uniform skirt around her legs. She leaned heavily on her cane, the polished wood digging into her palm. The pain in her hip, a souvenir from a Jeep accident 6 months prior that had nearly severed her femoral artery, was a constant, throbbing companion. "Stay back, Lieutenant," they had told her. "You're a liability in the field." So she stayed back. She ran the in-processing at the 95th Evacuation Hospital, a paper pusher, as the young grunts called her. She was the one who checked the tags of the wounded as they came off the dust-offs, directing the walking wounded to the tents and the critical cases to the operating rooms. It was necessary work, vital work, but it wasn't her work, not the real work. Clara hadn't always been a paper pusher. Back in the world, she had been the head triage nurse at a Level 1 trauma center in Chicago. She could read a patient's vitals before the monitor beeped. She could smell the difference between gangrene and simple infection. She had hands that could find a vein in the dark and a voice that could calm a screaming child. But now, those hands were reserved for stamping forms. The other nurses, young lieutenants fresh from nursing school with starched collars and eager eyes, pitied her. They whispered when she limped past. They didn't understand the fire that still burned behind her tired eyes. They didn't know that every time a helicopter's rotor blades changed pitch, her body tensed, her muscles remembering the rhythm of a trauma bay. Tonight was different, though. The air had a charge to it, a static electricity that had nothing to do with the coming monsoon. The radio chatter had spiked since noon. Something was brewing in the Ah Shau Valley. Clara could feel it in her bones, the same way an old war horse smells gunpowder. She finished her shift, stamped the last form, and limped back to her hooch, the wooden walls vibrating with the constant thrum of war. She fell asleep to the sound of distant thunder, or was it artillery? Out here, it was hard to tell the difference. She was the limping nurse, the one they told to stay back, and for now, that was exactly where she stayed. But the night was young, and the valley was about to erupt. The silence shattered just after 200. Clara was jolted awake not by an alarm, but by the primal shift in the sound of the helicopter rotors. It wasn't the steady rhythm of transport or patrol. It was the frantic, heavy beat of birds coming home to roost with a full belly of pain. She was already pulling on her fatigues over her white t-shirt when the loudspeakers crackled to life. "Mass casualties inbound! All available personnel to the receiving bay! I say again, mass casualties!" She grabbed her cane, but in her haste her hip seized, and she stumbled against the metal footlocker. The pain was a white-hot spike. For a moment, she just sat there on the edge of her cot, breathing through it, the sweat beading on her forehead. She could hear the pounding feet of the young nurses running past her hooch, their voices high with adrenaline. "Come on, Clara," she whispered to herself. She forced herself upright and began the slow, agonizing walk. By the time she reached the receiving bay, the scene was controlled chaos. The first Hueys were already touching down, their skids kissing the dirt even as corpsmen leaped out, grabbing at litters. Major Harrison, the chief surgeon, spotted her immediately. His face, streaked with sweat and someone else's blood, tightened with irritation. "Brown, what are you doing here? I need people who can move. Get back to in-processing." Clara straightened her back, ignoring the fire in her hip. "Sir, I can triage. You know I can triage." He didn't even look at her. He was already cutting the uniform off a screaming private whose legs ended in tourniquets. "I need runners. I need people to move litters. You can't run and you can't lift. Don't make me repeat myself, Lieutenant." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, retreating to the periphery of the light, her cane sinking into the mud. She watched as the young nurses, full of energy and fear, did their best. But she saw the mistakes. A kid with a sucking chest wound was tagged for X-ray before surgery. A boy with a minor gash on his head was given a plasma expander meant for shock victims, wasting precious supplies. The chaos wasn't controlled, it was just chaos. Helicopter after helicopter came in. The 95th evac was a beehive, but the bees were getting tired, getting sloppy. Clara stayed in the shadows, handing out cups of water to the walking wounded, wiping brows, doing the small jobs they'd let the cripple do. The night stretched on, an eternity of screams and the smell of burnt flesh and cordite. As the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, the flow seemed to slow. The medics leaned against the walls, exhausted. Clara allowed herself to think about her cot, about the blessed relief of lying down. Then, the radio crackled with a transmission that cut through the fatigue like a razor. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Dustoff 1-6. We are hit hard. I say again, we are hit hard. We have 1 KIA, 4 wounded. 1 is priority alpha. We are losing him. Repeat, we are losing the package. Engines out. We're going down in the wire. Coming in hot." Every head turned to the sky. The wire. The perimeter wire. The most dangerous place to land. The helicopter, a medevac Huey, was silhouetted against the dawn, trailing a plume of black smoke. It didn't so much land as fall, slamming into the dirt just inside the concertina wire, the skids buckling. "Harrison!" a voice boomed. It was Colonel Mathis, the base commander. He had appeared from nowhere. "That's the general's son on that bird. That's the Navy SEAL team. Get them out." Major Harrison froze. The wire was still hot. Sniper fire was still cracking from the tree line. Going out there was suicide. "Sir," Harrison stammered, "we need to wait for the reaction force to clear the perimeter." "We don't have time!" Mathis roared. And in that moment of paralysis, a voice spoke up. It was quiet, but it carried. "I can go." Everyone turned. Clara Brown stepped forward, leaning on her cane. "I'm the lightest one here. I can move faster than anyone carrying a full combat load. I just need 2 corpsmen to carry the litter." Major Harrison stared at her, his mouth open. You can't even walk!" Colonel Mathis looked at the cane, then at her eyes. He saw something there that Harrison, in his book-learned efficiency, had missed. Resolve. "Who the hell are you, Lieutenant?" Mathis asked. "Clara Brown, sir, triage nurse. I've done 4 tours. I know how to keep a man alive in the dirt." A sniper round pinged off the sandbag wall behind them. The smoke from the downed chopper was getting thicker. They were running out of time. Mathis made the call. "Get her a flak jacket and a medic bag. Move!" Clara threw her cane aside. She grabbed the flak jacket, ignoring the weight, and slung a massive aid bag over her shoulder. She looked at the 2 terrified young corpsmen. "Stay behind me, watch my back, let's go." And then, the limping nurse, the one they told to stay back, started to run. She ran with a hitch in her gait, a lurching, painful stride that was faster than it had any right to be. She ran toward the smoke, toward the fire, toward the screaming men trapped inside the burning bird. The world contracted to the sound of her own ragged breath, the pounding of her boots on the red dirt, and the sight of that twisted metal hulk getting closer with every agonizing step. The closer they got, the worse it looked. The Huey had sheared its rotor blades on impact, one of them embedded in the ground 10 yards away like a grotesque lawn dart. The plexiglass nose was spiderwebbed with cracks and smeared with blood. Thick black smoke billowed from the engine cowling, carrying the acrid stench of burning hydraulic fluid and aviation fuel. The worst sound wasn't the crackle of the flames or the distant pop of small arms fire. It was the screaming from inside. Clara hit the ground beside the fuselage, sliding on her knees, the impact jarring her hips so hard she saw stars. She bit her tongue, tasting copper, and forced herself to focus. The 2 corpsmen, Privates First Class Miller and Jensen, were right behind her, their faces pale moons of terror in the pre-dawn light. "Miller, check the pilots! Jensen, cover our 6!" Clara yelled, already pulling at the jammed side door. The door gave way with a groan, and the smoke poured out thicker. Inside, it was a slaughterhouse. The crew chief was slumped over his M60, obviously dead, a bullet hole neatly drilled through his temple. The two pilots were in the front, one moaning, one silent. But her eyes were drawn to the back. 4 men crammed into the jump seats. Navy SEALs. Even battered and broken, they looked different. They were bigger, their gear different, their faces painted in stripes of green and black. 3 of them were moving, trying to help the 4th. The 4th was bad. He was lying on the floor, his body jerking with tremors. A massive piece of shrapnel had torn through his left side, just below the flak jacket. The wound was a cavernous, bleeding hole. His face was ashen, his lips blue. This was the priority Alpha. This was the one they were losing. "Get the walking wounded out," Clara commanded. "Get them away from the bird. It could blow." The 3 SEALs, tough as they were, didn't argue. They had been in the shit long enough to know when to listen to authority. They grabbed their weapons, helped each other out of the wreckage, and staggered toward the base perimeter where a covering force was finally laying down suppressing fire. That left Clara alone in the burning helicopter with the dying man. She crawled over to him, the metal floor hot against her knees. She ripped open his flak jacket and stared at the wound. It was a mess. The shrapnel had nicked his femoral artery. He was bleeding out internally and externally. She could see the pulse in the wound, a terrifying sight. "Hey," she said, her voice firm. "Hey, sailor, look at me." His eyes, glassy with shock, tried to focus. He was young, impossibly young. His lips moved. "Angel 6, he rasped. "Call sign, Angel 6. "Okay, Angel 6, Clara said, already unpacking her bag. "You're not dying on my watch, you hear me?" She knew she couldn't clamp the artery in the field. It was too deep. She had to buy him time. She packed the wound with quick clot gauze, pushing it deep into the hole with her fingers. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was swallowed by the noise of the firefight. She applied a pressure dressing, winding it tight, tighter than she should have, hoping to stem the flow. His blood was all over her, hot and sticky. The smoke was getting thicker, making her eyes water. The fuel fumes were overwhelming. They had to move. Now! "Miller!" she screamed. "Get in here!" Miller appeared in the door, his face a mask of horror. "Ma'am, the fuel line's leaking. We have to go!" "Grab his shoulders! Now!" Together they hauled the man out of the wreckage. He was dead weight, all muscle and bone. Clara's hips screamed in agony, the muscles tearing with the effort. They dragged him 20 yards, then 30, away from the burning coffin. Jensen laid down covering fire, his M16 chattering into the tree line. Finally, they collapsed behind a small berm of dirt. Clara was on her knees, gasping for air. The SEAL, Angel 6, was unconscious. She checked his pulse. It was there, but it was thready, weak, a string threatening to snap. Then she heard it, a sound that brought a grim smile to her face. It wasn't the sound of more Hueys coming in. It was deeper, heavier. The whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of heavy rotor blades. She looked up. Coming over the tree line, huge and menacing in the dawn light, were 4 massive CH-53 sea stallions. They didn't circle or hover. They came in fast and hot, their side doors open, revealing the dark muzzles of heavy machine guns. They were Marines. The cavalry had arrived. The first sea stallion didn't even fully land. It hovered, its rear ramp dropping to the dirt. Marines in full battle rattle poured out, fanning into the tree line, the sound of their guns adding to the chaos. The second and third birds followed suit, creating a whirlwind of dust and debris. But it was the 4th helicopter that caught Clara's attention. It landed, fully touching down. The ramp dropped, and a man jumped out. He wasn't carrying a rifle. He was carrying a medical bag. Behind him came 4 more men, hauling a stretcher with advanced life support gear. The man ran toward Clara and the downed SEAL, ducking low under the rotors. He was older, his hair gray at the temples, his face weathered. He wore the insignia of a Navy commander, a doctor. "I'm Commander Ross," he shouted over the noise. "SEAL Team 2 medic. We got a radio burst that Angel 6 was down. Is that him?" Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. She pointed to the wound, now soaked through with blood. "Femoral, packed with quick clot, pressure dressing. Pulse is 130 and weak. Ross looked at the dressing, at the placement,